All right, it looks like the room's pretty full, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. This session is the technical overview and roadmap for Virtual Machine Manager. And you're going to see myself, my name's Eric Winter, and I'm the Group Program Manager for Virtual Machine Manager. With me is Johnnaby Ford, PM on the team, and she's going to walk you through a bunch of the current features that are available in VMM 2012, as well as Operations Management Suite. And then in the roadmap section, I'm going to have John Patterson and Hector Linares on the team come up and show some of the stuff that's in the tech preview build. So overall, we decided to split this session into two parts. The first part is to give you a view of what's in 2012 R2, specifically focused on how we get customer feedback, what we put in our update roll-ups, and then how you can use 2012 R2 with the Operations Management Suite. So how many people here are currently using Virtual Machine Manager? Excellent, excellent. And then the second half, or maybe even the last 25 minutes, we're going to go through a bit of what's coming in System Center 2016, show you our investment profiles, and then give you some quick demos, and then all the related sessions we're doing here this week. There are about 3 other deep dive sessions on Virtual Machine Manager. And then a lot of the Windows Server sessions also tend to mention how Virtual Machine Manager plugs into certain features of Hyper-V or certain features in the storage or networking areas. How many people in the room went to the track kickoff session, Jeremy Winter's kickoff for all of System Center, the whole roadmap? Okay. So we're going to repeat a little bit of that content, so it looks like that'll be good for most of the room to see some of that again. And then how about last evening we had a very unfortunate scheduling conflict where the networking session was scheduled at the same time as the host management session. So did anyone go to the 5 o'clock networking session last night for Hyper-V? Okay, handful of you. We're not going to do a whole lot of networking content in this particular session. It's pretty complex, and it takes more or less its whole session, but we have a reference at the end for Hyper-V networking and Virtual Machine Manager in that session. So feel free to check that out. And then how about the host management session last night at 5 o'clock? Were folks able to go to that one? Okay, a handful or two. So we're going to actually talk a bit about some of our host features and give a demo of that. So I think you'll be pleased to see that. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Johnnaby, and she's going to go through our 2012 R2 feature sets.
Thanks. Good morning. Wow, we have such a lively crowd for a morning. Well, we appreciate you spending the morning with us. I know that Wednesday night is usually the best night for parties at these things, so I know it takes a lot sometimes to get out in the morning. How many people here are on 2012 R2? Can I see a show of hands? Oh, I love it. Awesome. Okay, and do we have any on SP1? Even better. I see like 1 or 2, 3, couple. Thank you for being brave and admitting that. So we'd certainly encourage you to move forward onto 2012 R2. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the features that are in R2 today and will be coming soon. So this is about a week old. We just released Update Rollup 6, and I was actually pretty excited to see that we got in the register. And I love the way that they said there's little features that Redmond reckons you'll like. Nicely alliterative there, but that's actually accurate. So what we're trying to do these days in update rollups is really start to add features and functionality so that you don't have to wait for the entire time frame to get to the 2016 release date, right? It used to be that we would work for a year, sometimes 2, depending on which product we were looking at, and then we would sort of come out with this big dump of new features that you had to learn and ramp up on and all that. And with VMM sort of starting in UR5, we realized we really needed to start delivering features and functionality sort of at a quicker cadence. And so we made some engineering improvements to do that. And so our goal here is really to go faster. So we want to deliver things sort of in the same way that you're accustomed to getting things on your phone in a regular small updates. And that's what we're looking to do in URs. So really, if you have a question about, when's your next release date or when is something new coming out, the answer is yes, now, soon. So you can see we really have a very rapid cadence here. So we have the sort of blue dots there that are the quarterly updates. So those are the sort of regular cadence that comes out. The 2014, 15, 16, that's sort of our aligned to Windows Server cadence. And we're going to talk about what's coming for that in the back half of this presentation. And then the management services. How many people here have heard about the Operations Management Suite in the announcements? Good, so most of you have heard of that. So those are things that are delivered at a service cadence. So, I talk about being fast for URs, and I mean on a 3-month cadence. They talk about being fast, and they're talking about daily updates. So all of that's going on. All of that are things that, hook into VMM or VMM releases. So really, you might have heard about Satya talk about us being data-driven and how sort of data is the lifeblood of the organizations these days. I'm not sure this is exactly what he meant, but it's really true. We really are changing our focus to be much more looking at the data, making our decisions based on data, and in fact, all of you are participating in that today with that sheet of paper that you got when you came in. So one of the things that we do is we frequently survey places like this to figure out what are your greatest pains, where are the biggest gaps, what is it that's really bothering you today in your data center. So those things really matter. We really do make decisions based on what we see from these conferences. So I would really encourage you to fill that out, tell us what you need, and then give it to one of us or turn it in at the back when you leave. So this is some of the data that we look at pretty regularly. This is our trends in UR downloads. So kind of wanted to share this back with you guys. This is what we see from what you're doing. And the thing that sort of stands out to me here is every UR we've released has gotten sort of more uptick, which is good. And in fact, even sort of looking at UR6, you can see that there's a significant uptick, like we're sort of going even faster. You'll notice that there is a UR that is missing from here, and that is UR4. And the reason why UR4 is missing from this trend line is because we goofed. So when we sent out UR4, we sent it out with some faulty packaging, and so we had to pull it and then reissue it, which then, of course, threw our numbers completely off. It looked like UR4 was, in fact, the most popular that we ever had because people re-downloaded it. And that's one of the things that we've learned as we've started shipping these URs that are sort of bulkier URs on a faster cadence. We weren't accustomed to doing it before. We're getting better at it. We have some learnings that we got from UR4. We don't intend to make those mistakes again. And it looks to me like from this that you guys are sticking with us. You're still having more downloads, so we really appreciate that. How many people here have downloaded UR6 already? Good, so like third. So I would definitely encourage the rest of you to do so since, your peers are, given the numbers. So another way, so I think sort of a reasonable question then is, well, if you're data-driven, how is it that you know kind of what we want? And one way that we do that is through this thing called user voice. Oh, that's not the right one. So this is a website that we have. I think it launched probably 2 or 3 months ago, and we really look at this regularly. This is something we pull up in our program management meeting. So all of us up here pull this up on a weekly basis. We tend to look at it. Every time we look at a UR, while we're starting to triage the items that we're going to put in it, we have sort of 2 channels. So one is the CSS channel, and that's when you call support and you say this thing is broken. So you file a bug, and they say, okay, it's a bug. We're going to have the product team fix it. And then they say, we're not going to charge you because it's a bug. That's one route that comes in to us. The other route is through things like this. And so when we're sort of designing what our next UR is going to be, our first stop is to look here and see which of these items can we pull off? What will they fit? What will fit in a UR, right? Because we can't always do huge things, but there's a lot of things that people want that are small, that are sort of easy for us to slip into the UR chain. So what you can see here is, we have 124 votes on something that I suspect will not surprise any of you about the easier setup and management of logical switches, and some other items. So all you need to do to join this is come in, provide your email address, vote on something that you want. If you don't see it at all, feel free to add it, and then encourage other people you know who have the same problem to vote on it, and that will sort of bubble it up to the top for us. The other thing you can see here is we've actually completed some of these, right? And I'll talk about more of these later. But these are things that were listed inside of user voice. In some cases, we had sort of already in flight, so it was sort of a confirmation that we needed to include them. In other cases, they triggered that we really should focus on getting them in. And then we have some that, if they have sort of small enough votes, sometimes people have things like, I'd like my face on an icon or something like that. Maybe wouldn't get a ton of votes, so we'll close those out after time. So the other thing that we do is we do what we call cohort testing. And cohort is sort of a fancy word that just means small group. And when we ask for your email address on the user voice, part of the reason why we're doing that is because we want to reach back out to you as we start designing that feature or implementing that feature and ask if you'd be willing to work with us and test it and help us design it. So you'll see this come back a lot. We're going to keep asking, can we contact you? And the reason for that is we would love to show you the early prototypes of things. We would love to show you sort of the early coding. We'd love to get it out in your environment so you guys can see, does it actually work for you in the real world versus sort of how we test things. And so this is something that we started doing with the URs. We've had many of our features go through cohort testing. The Azure View is sort of a notable one of the ones that I'm going to show you, the Gen 2 as well. And it's just something that is going to be sort of part of how we do business. The other thing we have is we have this thing called Watson. So how many of you have seen that little pop-up that says something crashed, send logs to Microsoft? Common. Please hit yes. The reason why we want you to hit yes there is it comes in, it gets aggregated with everybody else's data, and then we look at that and we can tell this particular thing is causing a lot of people a lot of pain, and then we can go fix it. So we use this to inform triage decisions. So one of the things that we were looking at for UR6 was we saw a spike in our crash logs. One of our developers saw a spike in the crash logs about dynamic optimization, that there were sort of all these errors that were being thrown in the background if you had DO on automatically. And then sort of through a separate channel, CSS came in and told us, hey, this customer is seeing all of this. Can you guys do something about it? Well, normally we would say, well, okay, it's a bug. We got to figure out how that prioritizes against all these other bugs. But it was completely obvious in this case because we had 7,000 hits on this. So we knew a lot of people were hitting this. And so that made it very easy to triage it in and fix it at the beginning of UR6. And we noticed that as we released UR5, we were already working on the fix for UR6 because of this. We've also had instances where customers have called CSS and sent logs to them, and then they've sent them to the engineering team, and we look at it and we can say, yep, we recognize this particular bug. It's already fixed in the next UR. So these are things that we use pretty regularly. The other thing that's important here is we now dedicate time in URs to fix each of these. So we'll pull off sort of the top several Watson crash bugs pretty much every UR. And you can see for the last 3 URs, we've actually fixed 27 of these things. One of the things that I've been standing in the booth a lot this week, and one of the things that people have told me over and over as I talk to them and I say, have you installed the latest UR? Because I'm kind of all about the URs, if you haven't noticed. And most people say yes, and I say, how's that working out for you? And what I've really heard is, with 4, 5, and 6, the URs have really just been getting better and better. And so a lot of these things are really coming back to you, and I would really encourage you, just keep up with the URs. We're committed to rolling forward and making things better. So let's talk about the past year. in the past year, we've had over 300 improvements. And you can see UR5 is where we really made a huge quality push. The developers just did an amazing amount of work there, fixing bugs, putting in features, the whole 9 yards. UR5 and UR6, those little magenta, I guess I'm going to call it, bars, those are the features that we started to add, beginning with UR5. It actually wouldn't surprise me as time goes on if those bars sort of even out a little bit more, but we'll see. And then these are the sort of notable improvements from UR5. You'll notice, some maintenance mode behaviors were fixed. We fixed some of the locking contention, which I know was a big pain for a lot of the people who are calling TSS, so I assume you all as well. We made it a little more resilient to out-of-band changes. That's actually something that we're going to continue to look at doing for the next, foreseeable future, because that's something that we know that people make out-of-band changes, and sometimes that causes an issue with VMM, and so we're going to keep peeling that onion. And then in UR6, we made sort of some other notable improvements, particularly around the removal of VMs in service. So previously, if you were trying to do a remove host and a VM were part of a service, we would let you remove it, and then things would get a little off. And so we're currently blocking that. We're actually looking at, for future URs, making that so that we just do the right thing, and so that we can deal with orphan VMs and things like that. So UR5 had several new features. Hopefully all of you are familiar with these. So the diff disk options for VM role, this is it allows you to specify that you do not wish diff disk options to be, or you do not wish diff disks to be used with VM role, which was something that was a big ask for us, particularly for sort of our integration up through WAP. Integrate SAN remote replication with ASR. This was a huge feature. Our dev manager actually joked as part of UR5 that he sort of felt like we reshipped the entire product. And then we started our SQL Server 2014 support. So in UR5, you can use SQL 2014 as a database, and UR6, you can actually deploy using the service templates for Server 2014. So we'll talk about some of the UR6 features now. So this one is actually a new one. So how many people here use VMM to manage VMware? So some, okay. And how many people here are on VMware 5.5? Lots of people. And what about 6? Some people, okay, good. So this is something that we've gotten a lot of feedback on, that our support is currently not at the 5.5 level. We're lagging a bit. And so this is actually a new announcement here. You guys are some of the first to hear. So we're announcing that for UR6, so that's the one that's already out, we're supporting VMware 5.5 for these operations, which we think are sort of the most commonly used ones that people need most often. We're continuing to look at the rest of it. That's actually a testing process that's going on right now. And we're going to keep looking at, for URs, flighting in sort of the VMware support at a faster cadence. And this is my pitch here about cohorts. So we would actually love to get with you if you are using VMware and you want to see more support in VMM for VMware. We'd love to get early drops to you. We'd love to hear which features specifically you need. Today for URs, our support for VMware 5.5 is going to be at the same level that our support for VMware is today. So new features that come in for 5.5 will not necessarily be supported out of the gate for VMM, but that's what we want to talk to you guys about. We want to know, are there things that you really need there? So if you want to get early drops, this is a URL where you can specifically sign up for VMware, aka.ms/Joe Ford. Joe Ford is also my alias, so if you just want to write me at joeford@Microsoft, you can do that. And if enough of you sign up, I get a bottle of scotch. So. Black Label. So the other thing we have for UR6 is Gen 2 VM templates, and this we have heard a lot. So I want to know, is Daniel Newman in the audience? Oh, there you are. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for writing this comment in user voice. So you can see Daniel had this very concise thing about it should be clear that we need Gen 2 VM support. The VM role deployments need to support Gen 2 support, and right now it's a lack in VMM. And so in UR6, we've added Gen 2 VM support for service templates. You can drag and drop them in. They work like everything else. You can also designate a cloud to be Gen 2 capable. And then when you deploy VMs in WAP to that cloud, you can get Gen 2 templates. So that is new. Let's see here. Oh, there we go. So one of the other things that we heard was that for Replica, a lot of people were telling us that we weren't allowing you to overcommit clouds or host groups for Replica. And the reason why we did that was we thought, well, if you've got sort of a backup site or something like that, if everything's gone down, you need everything to come up. So you're not going to want to have your sort of secondary piece be overcommitted. And really the feedback we got is we don't need all the VMs to boot at once. Like maybe some are more important than others. We still would rather overcommit. And so in UR6, you can now set clouds and host groups. It's through custom tagging to allow overcommit. The other thing that we heard a lot, and this is really from service providers, we heard this very strongly, was that they really wanted to be able to charge your customers based on network usage on an hourly basis. And that wasn't something that we came out of the gate with for chargeback. So we have now 2 new rules that are in our management pack that target Hyper-V hosts and check for inbound and outbound traffic. And that's actually now deployed all the way through WAP. So if you install sort of the URs throughout the entire stack, you will get this end to end. So this is something else we got, right? And this is one of the things that was on the user voice. So you said, you know, we really want a lightweight way to see VMs and public clouds in VMM. And so we have this new Azure view in the console where you can see VMMs in Azure, and you can do some of the most common operations in them. And I'll show you that. Oh, thank you. Oh, all right, so what we're seeing here is our VMM console. And you can see that, right, we have this certain number of VMs in Azure. And if we go back to the console, those VMs are also here with the same status. Now, this is pretty easy to set up. If you go to this Azure subscription, there's a add subscription button. And all you do is type in the name of whatever you want it to display in VMM. Doesn't have to match the Azure thing. The subscription ID, and then kind of the only tricky bit is that you've got to grab the certificate from Azure and install it on the same machine that you have the console. But once you've done that, you're good to go. And then you can see from here, if you click one of these, that you can start them. So we can start that one up. And then for one that's running, you can connect to it. So that will do. So there it is up in Azure. Now, we don't just have Amazon, right? We know that not everyone, or not just Azure, we know that not everyone uses Azure, unfortunately. But Amazon, actually, we worked with them, and they created an add-in. So this is through the add-in functionality. You'll notice up here that they have this notion of creating EC2 instances and also viewing. I just got to get in the right spot here. Yep. We may have a network disconnect. We've had that problem recently. Oh. So while that's restarting, you can see here that we have these 2 VMs in Azure. I didn't want more because I don't want to pay Azure a ton of money. Amazon. Too many A's. I don't know why we did that. All right, let's take 2 here. Where is this? Oh, there we are. There we go. Excellent. All right. Amazon VMs. There they are. We only have 2. Don't want to pay Amazon. And here, again, you can notice the same thing, right? They have the same types of operations that we do, shutdown, start, restart. They also have the ability to create in here, if that's something that you think we need in Azure and VMM. There's this thing I showed earlier called user voice. You should go there, you should add it, and that will help us prioritize that against all the other things that you want. So the other piece that we have, right, is we have this backlog list. I feel like I need to say this because we have so many people in the room. This is not me committing to this coming out on a particular time schedule, but these are the things that we're looking at. So these are things that we're looking at for future URs. You'll notice there's a high overlap here with what's in user voice, but there's some other ones that we've added, for example, like down-level support for threshold guests and things like that. So these are the things that we're aware of. These are sort of what we're looking at for the more short term. And then there's sort of this final UR tip, because I get asked this a lot. So if you're bringing up a new system, you do not need to install each update rollup in sequence. So the update rollups actually collect all of the UR from the prior URs. So if you're installing a new system today, just go straight to UR6. You know, UR2 contains UR1, UR3 contains both of those, et cetera. All right, so that's URs. So we also want to talk a little bit about expanding capabilities with the Microsoft Operations Management Suite. So this is something else that's available today. You don't have to wait for this. You can go out and sign up for it. And in fact, we would love if you did. There are free tiers available, and essentially you can sign up for the free tier. The free tier is not going to go away. It's not like a 30-day trial or anything like that. There are limits to the amount of data that you can bring up or how long you can retain data based on whether you're a free tier or a pay tier. But we would really encourage you just go give it a whirl, add some servers, see what happens, and give us feedback. And really, this has evolved, right? So if we think about the span of all of the management over time, right? We start with sort of enterprise desktop. We moved to sort of, early 90s, that server proliferation, and then some of the virtualization. And then really the past couple years or so, we've really been talking about private clouds versus hybrid clouds. And going forward, we really have seen that people are starting to ask us for services. And when we say services in this instance, we don't mean everything's up in the cloud, because we know that many of you have on-prem assets. That's why you're here. But we're talking about services where the services are in the cloud and they're managing your on-prem assets. So there's still data that's in your data center. You can still, lock that as necessary. But then you can do sort of simple things from the cloud without having to install more management infrastructure, right? Because we know that installing the management infrastructure and maintaining that and the care and feeding of that isn't really core to your day job. So really, our goals around these are to be, very heterogeneous, to work across, sort of all the things we say, AWS and Azure and on-prem, Linux and Unix, Linux and Windows. So that's sort of the types of principles that we're looking at here. And then the goal here really is to be just simple and to give you quick time to value. So the first one that I'm going to show you here is our capacity management. Okay. So what you can see here is this is the operations management suite, and this is with many of the intelligence packs installed. So you can kind of go to a gallery, grab different intelligence packs, install the ones that you want, leave off the ones that you aren't interested in. So you get a very targeted solution based on what you want. So there's this thing here called capacity planning, and we know that a lot of you really want to know when you're going to run out of capacity, when you need to plan for more capacity. And that's really what this is designed to do. And this hooks up with VMM, right? So this uses data from VMM. So it's a complementary solution. It's not a replacement. And it looks like it logged out there, so let's try that again. So you can see here, right, we have this graph that shows how much capacity we have available, how much we've historically used. And there's these sliders that can show you what the projection is for the future. So I'm actually going to drill into one of these. So this shows our utilization today, right? We're at 95% approximately utilized. And there's sort of some number of cores and memory available. And while this projection tool is loading, this efficiency shows you sort of how many VMs are idle versus running, and looks like our service didn't quite work. We are in the early days of some of this, so we've actually had things fixed on site before, so I'm sure it will be back up shortly, but I will not be able to show you that one. But I can show you this. So this shows you kind of what the direct attached storage looks like, what your available disk space is, what the performance is, and then again, this slider where you can sort of roll this out to the right and see as you do that what we expect. And this is using analytics on the back end, right? So we're taking all our historical data, we're making guesses based on what we know about the past usage. So that's one thing to check out. And then there's also the Azure Site Recovery, disaster recovery. So I'll hand that to Hector.
All right, good morning, everyone. All right, let's switch over here. All right, so we'll return to the VMM view. This is VMM 2012 R2. And what you see here on the Fabric side is a set of VMs that I've got deployed. And one of the environments that I want to show is now how I can protect this environment with Azure Site Recovery. So my journey actually starts in Azure. So I'll switch over to ASR. This is the view that I have for recovery services. So how many of you have used or have been looking at ASR, Azure Site Recovery? All right, excellent. And so if I click into the services, what I first see is a recovery vault. This is essentially where I keep all of my metadata that I'm going to use for tracking the virtual machines that I want to protect and orchestrate using ASR. And so if I click into my recovery vault, I'll see that I can go into protected items. And I start the protection journey using VMM clouds. And so from the cloud, I actually publish that metadata into ASR, and from ASR I can see all of the virtual machines that I want to start protecting. So if I click into Cloud 1, this is my primary site. I've already got a set of VMs that are protected with ASR. In this particular instance, these VMs are deployed on the SAN, and I'm using SAN replication between two sites to actually protect the virtual machines. So if I flip back into Virtual Machine Manager, and I go into my primary site, so I've got these 5 VMs already protected, and so on the primary site, they're running, your applications is up, and your users are being served their data. On the secondary site, I'll see that the VMs are present as well, so you can see them, you can search for them, but you can't actually turn them on or manage them like you would a running VM. They're actually in a reserved state, so we know that replication is happening, and that you can only activate them when you fail over. And so if I want to actually start protecting a virtual machine, I would go to Create a new virtual machine. Nope. In this case, I've got a template, so I'll accelerate the provisioning process a little bit. And in the hardware profile, there we go. In the hardware profile, if I scroll down to Microsoft Azure Site Recovery, I have two options. I can either enable this VM to be protected by Hyper-V Replica. I can specify 30-second, 5-minute, or 15-minute replication time, or I can pick a replication group. In this case, this is a consistency group in the SAN that actually does all of the replication for you. And this is pretty much it. If you want to protect the VM, all you need is this checkbox and to specify a RPO or a replication group. At this point, VMM will do all the placement checks for you, deploy the VM to the right hosts, and then signal to ASR that this VM actually has to be protected. At that point, all of the orchestration starts kicking in. ASR will start creating the VM on the other side using Hyper-V Replica or other mechanisms in VMM and make sure that it's up and running and available and receiving all of the data. So when you actually want to start the failover process, I'm going to flip back into Azure Site Recovery. So the first thing you want to do is once it's protected, you actually want to make sure that the secondary site, the application, can actually be stood up and all the settings are correct. So I would start in Site 2. This is my secondary site, my receiving site. And I've got the option down here at the bottom to do a test failover. So in this case, we're actually taking a clone of all the virtual machines on the secondary site. We'll stand them up in an isolated network. You can run all of your DR drills to make sure that the application is running correctly, all the settings are correct. And then once you're done, I mean, that could take a day, that could take 2 weeks. Once you're done, you say TFO or test failover complete, we'll go off and clean all of that environment. Throughout this whole time, the primary site is still up, all of the replication is still happening. So in the event that you actually have a failover, that you actually have a disaster, you still are getting all of your data to the other side, even though you're running a DR drill. This is just a snapshot. In the SAN case, we actually use SAN snapshot and cloning to do all of the LUN cloning. We'll unmask them to the hosts, present the VMs, stand them up in ASR, and then you can do all your DR drills, and it will clean up all of the SAN artifacts as well once you're done with TFO. And so when I want to actually fail over, you select the VMs or the recovery plans that you want to fail over, and you can either do a planned or unplanned failover. In this case, a planned failover gracefully shuts down the primary site, shuts everything down, and unregisters a VM, and then on the secondary site, registers, powers on, and makes sure that everything is running. In the SAN case, we'll do the masking on the primary site, and then unmasking on the secondary site. Unplanned means that the primary site is down, and we will actually check. If you try to kick off a planned failover now with the primary site up, we'll tell you this is not a safe operation, and we won't allow it to go through. But in an unplanned case, primary site is down, we'll actually yank all of the replication, we'll assume that we can't get to the primary, and we'll stand up the secondary site. Now, this is not an automatic failover, so if Site 1 goes down, someone still has to go to Azure and click failover, right? If you're using stretch clusters between two sites, that's where you get the automatic failover of virtual machines based on hosts actually going down in one site. So in a planned failover, we'll confirm exactly where all the VMs are failing over to. Once you hit OK, we'll do all of the orchestration to go from Site 1 to Site 2. Oops. The last piece I'll show here with, all right. Since we're protecting at the VM level, right, we're failing over at the VM level, between the two sites, you have the option of enabling an active-passive DR scenario or active-active. And so we're not failing over the entire data center when you click failover. Since you can group VMs into what's called a recovery plan, which essentially is your application, and that's what you would actually fail over from Site 1 to Site 2. So you can actually have two sites both active with applications running in both replicating across. And then you can choose which ones actually fail over, and so you have that flexibility. Otherwise, if you're familiar with active-passive, you can continue to do that. But the unit of failover in this case is a VM or a group of VMs that represent an application. All right? So I'm going to hand it over back to Jonaby, or to Eric. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Okay, thanks, Hector. Is this off? All right, I think we're good. All right, so with that, I think it concludes the 2012 R2 part of the presentation. So everything you saw in the first part of this presentation, you could be using in your data centers today. So that's everything up through UR6, as well as all of the services that we've launched here. And most of those services are actually very relevant to Virtual Machine Manager. And I know internally when we talked about the services, we often thought of it as in-guest management and how was it relevant to what we sometimes call the fabric management, which is a lot of what Virtual Machine Manager does. And it turns out Azure Backup, Azure Site Recovery, capacity management in Op Insights, as well as even the Azure automation is very relevant to fabric management. You can use the automation scripts are used during site recovery, and you can actually, with a feature they launched this week for Azure Automation, reach into your data center and do automated tasks down through Hyper-V if you choose to. So I would encourage you to check out the operations management suite. Today, it's kind of a loose collection of standalone services. We do want to work on integration scenarios moving forward, but sort of our current mode of operating is to get stuff out when we think it has value to you today and iterate forward. And on the services, you'll see stuff happen on a weekly, monthly basis, and ideally with no disruption to what you're doing as those new features unfold throughout the fall. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears to, I think I'm going forward. Maybe I'm going, forward. To 2016. So how many people, I've been working on Virtual Machine Manager since the very beginning. How many people used Virtual Machine Manager 2007? Okay, that's not bad. How about 2008? And then 2008 R2, big feature, live migration in Hyper-V, right? Great. All right, so that's good. So a lot of you have been on the journey with us, and you've seen times where in Virtual Machine Manager we were able to get ahead of Hyper-V. So we, for instance, supported live migration as a management construct against VMware before live migration existed in Hyper-V. And then as Hyper-V would release new features, we would sort of bind to the live migration in Hyper-V and support things like dynamic optimization. One of the things that I know we've heard in recent years is, why is it that the platform's releasing features and Virtual Machine Manager is falling behind? And so that we definitely experienced that from sort of the 2012 R2 wave was very apparent that things like that were happening and that it was causing a lot of pain for folks in the room. We've gotten a lot better in the 2016 wave. So as the 2012 R2 wave shipped, it became apparent not just to us, but to also the Windows Server team that if management didn't support the feature, it was very hard for customers to go live with it in production in their data center. So even the things we thought were, let's just get it out in Hyper-V, that'll be great, then they were getting feedback that said, my customers can't go live with Gen 2 VMs all up because it's not in service templates or VM roles, so it's of limited value. So right as 2012 R2 shipped, we started working on a cohesive set of scenarios, and they were organized into 10 or, about 4 or 5 pillars across Windows Server and System Center and Azure, and went through a lot of planning meetings where we then broke those pillars into scenarios, and so you're seeing the result of a lot of that work today. So for the first time ever, this week, we shipped the tech preview of System Center on the same day as the tech preview of Windows Server. Right? Used to lag by 30 to 60, 90 days. And there's really good feature alignment within the two for managing scenarios from platform through to management. And you'll see some of those demos coming up. There's one notable exception that I will talk about, which is NanoServer. It was late breaking in Windows Server, shall we say, coming in hot, we sometimes describe that. And so too much of it was changing for the management side to align for this conference, but it was so new that was one, and since it's just in preview mode, that was one that we sort of decided it is better to get that one out, even if VMM's not quite at the management level of it. And we'll catch that in a later preview. So you'll still see a little bit of this as we drop these sequential previews, but in general, there'll be tight alignment, and by the time everything ships, we'll be fully aligned. For the new features, we're still aware, as Johnny pointed out, that we sort of have a backlog where Failover Cluster Manager and Hyper-V Manager and VMM aren't aligned. And we are working on that primarily in the UR stream. And we know that's terminology misalignment. We know that's data synchronization misalignment. And we know that's functional misalignment. And we're trying to prioritize that list very fine-grained so we can incrementally make progress instead of taking a big effort and trying to focus on it all at once. So again, even that area, we're trying to prioritize what we do. So here's the delivery model. As I said, we're going to talk mostly about the 2016 wave of features coming. And I just have one slide here, and then we're going to drop into demos. But this gives you a view of our investment profile. I was talking with the team this week. We used to talk about, here's what we're doing in compute, and here's what we're doing in network, and here's what we're doing in storage. And we really didn't think about this release in that same way. We had more of a scenario focused, and just in summarizing it here, if you want to see that compute network storage view, it's sort of in the far right-hand column around fabric management. But we really know that System Center all up, managing your data center is complicated, and we're trying to make things easier to use. So we're focused on simplicity, specifically in some of our own workflows. So we have a wizard for building Hyper-V host clusters, and we have a wizard for building scale-out file server clusters, and those were annoyingly different. There were hooks for running scripts in one that weren't in the other, and there were ways that one operated that was different from the other. And so in the Tech Preview 2 release, actually, we've unified those two experiences. So anywhere there's a hook to run a script, you can do it on the host or the storage server. It's not different anymore. So that was sort of our own making. We also, and you saw this on the user voice list, that networking is hard. We're like, they should just put that on a T-shirt. Networking is hard. So we're trying not to make it any harder. And I think we invented some management constructs like our logical switch that's sort of the switch profile that spans hosts, and some of those things we introduced to help you manage at scale. But in certain areas, those things added another conceptual layer to learn above the multiple layers of networking that are out there. So there's an active investigation going on for how can we simplify some of the networking management within Virtual Machine Manager to bind more closely to what's in Hyper-V. I will say one of the feedback we get here very often from VMware customers is just make it look like VMware. So that is one input stream we're looking at. Yeah, we hear that. And I don't know if that's because it's simple or that people have just had time to learn what that does and they're at least comfortable with it. So one or the other. But we are looking at what VMware has done in this area. I think some of what they do is ask for more networking to be done outside of the management product itself, and then when you lay on top of it, you've avoided some complexity. We try and reach all the way down into the base Hyper-V up. So you'll see some work in that area. We'll be talking to customers about things in that area over the next few months as we try and sort out how can we make things better. Cluster rolling upgrades for clusters. We are going to demo today, so I'm not going to talk a lot about that. John's got a few slides to go through on that. And then diff-disk support is something we brought forward, I think, from the update rollups. So you should see alignment between the tech preview and the update rollup value as well. And then, again, some patching of hosts during bare metal, so you don't have to deploy a host and then patch it. We can sort of do that in one workflow. So that's ease of use, and there's probably a longer list there, but these are the highlighted items. Then there was a security pillar and a bunch of security scenarios that spanned System Center and Windows Server. And this is one of those areas where we worked very closely together so that in the tech preview, you can actually use VMM to manage guarded hosts and shielded VMs. A fair amount of that, I think, is in PowerShell, but it's still, we're bringing this thing together and it'll get better over time. I don't think this particular area, and I know that John Patterson, who's going to come up, John Patterson and John Messick had their session last night, and it seemed like some of this information wasn't widely known throughout the conference around what had Hyper-V even done, and then what was VMM doing on top of it, and it's pretty complex, so I'd encourage you to either watch the Hyper-V sessions on this or the session on host management to get a feel for what this means to you. I think for some of this you need new hardware. You need really, really new hardware, so that may also limit the early adoption of this, but it's basically the virtualized TPM within Hyper-V and surfacing that all the way up. And then a bunch of other security around, there you see consistency and resiliency in this here, which is more about our own internal infrastructure rather than security, but we've bucketed that in this middle column. And then the expanded fabric management is where you'll see that alignment with Windows Server features. And that's where we're going to do another demo today. Hector's going to come back up. Hector is our storage guru, maybe the storage guru, at least within Microsoft. I'm sure if you know storage, you know Hector. And he's going to come up and show our integration with some of the new storage features in Windows Server. And this is an area, as well as cluster upgrade, where it's all the way up through the UI where we've captured it for this tech preview. And that was an area that required a lot of late coding up to this week, basically, into the build. So, that was a case where we were really working hard to get it in the build, so we had this end-to-end story to present, because, again, that's something we're very focused on. All right, with that, I think I'm going to call up John Patterson to go over the rolling upgrade, and then he's going to hand it off to Hector to show the storage spaces, and then we'll wrap up.
Typically, I talk loud anyway. There we go. Okay. So yeah, kind of going along with what Hector said, one thing we had heard from you guys and the Windows Server team had heard was, hey, upgrading my cluster is really tough. And here's the clicker. Oops. Well, now you know the solution. But we heard upgrading clustering is really tough and really expensive and really time-consuming. And does Microsoft really expect me to have $20,000 of extra hardware laying around in the case I need to upgrade to its new version because I can't use anything on my current cluster to do the upgrade? So we heard a whole bunch of complaints from you guys, and we felt the pain of that. So with the clustering team, we worked together to introduce this concept, and this is the platform concept, of a mixed mode cluster. So all a mixed mode cluster is, it's a 2012 R2 cluster, but you can actually add threshold nodes into it. So what that kind of looks like is we can evict one node in terms of a cluster upgrade, right? Redeploy it with threshold and re-add it back in. So rather than having an entire cluster sitting on the side, maybe one host, or maybe you can even take the hit of losing one host from your currently running cluster, depending on how much you're utilizing. So if we imagine we evict one node, redeploy it as threshold, come back in a 4-node cluster, kind of like what I'm demoing here, a little bit of time, do that 4 times, and you basically still have a Windows 2012 R2 cluster, but now it's all threshold nodes. And then with a simple call to the platform layer, we can update the entire cluster to threshold, and you've kind of had this automated, one at a time, not having downtime experience. So in technical preview, in what we're shipping with build, our build release, we support the concept of having multiple versions of the cluster, or multiple versions of Windows within the same cluster. But we're going a step further, and VMM is going to build on top of this and just automate the entire workflow for you. So we'll do the evict from the cluster, redeploy, and add to the cluster. So we're in an earlier stage of developing this right now, and so I can't do a live demo for that reason and the fact that deploying nodes takes kind of a while, and you don't want to, I can't be up here for a few hours while nodes redeploy. So I recorded this, and my devs were super excited to share this with you, so we got it in today. So they've worked really late. They've helped me record to get this so you guys can kind of see what we've been working on. So here we go in VMM. We have a 3-node cluster, all running 2012 R2. And when we right-click the cluster, we see 2 new options, upgrade cluster and update version. Update version has to do with committing that functional level. And at this stage, it doesn't really make a lot of sense because there's there's no level to update. So we're going to start the upgrade cluster with this evict, redeploy, re-add workflow. So we click update cluster. Oh, here we go. I can even look at it over here. It's easier. And so we select what nodes of this cluster do we want to upgrade. In this case, we want to upgrade all of them. We want to do the entire cluster. So we select all, and then we select a physical computer profile that basically contains the threshold VHD, or the Windows Server 2016 VHD. And we can see the operating systems make sense. We're going from 2012 R2 to Technical Preview Data Center, so to 2016, which makes sense. We will skip cluster validation here, click Next. Then we have to tell VMM how am I going to connect to these servers out of band to actually do the redeployment. So this is the BMC Baseboard Management Controller. We select the credentials as well as the protocol. This is internal, so we're using kind of our own testing protocol here. Click Next. And since these computers were not deployed with VMM, here in a second, yeah, here we go. Since these computers weren't deployed with VMM, we need to know the IPs of the BMCs. If we had deployed these computers with VMM, we would already know this information. But if you haven't deployed your servers with VMM, you can still just enter it here. Furthermore, this is templatized through what we call physical machine configuration, all the settings that were currently on the host. So during this eviction, redeployment, and re-add process, we bring back all your settings. We keep your networking the same. We keep your storage the same. We keep your VM placement paths the same. So the only information we need to type in here is IP addresses, and there's 3 of them, since this is a 3-node cluster. And in just a second here, we'll click Next. Perfect. Yep. We confirm the settings. We're redeploying 3 nodes. We see the profile we're using. We're skipping cluster validation. We just get a summary of what we're doing. Click Finish, and this job kicks off, which is basically automating what you would have to manually do, right? Evicting, redeploying. We're automating that entire workflow for you. And so now we're working on the first node. We've evicted it from the cluster. You can even see the hosts in the cluster have dropped. And in just a second here, the first node will redeploy. Yeah, perfect. The first node's redeployed. We have 2 in R2 and 1 in technical preview. The cluster functional mode is a mixed version, which makes sense. We're mixing the versions. And the functional level is still 8, indicating it's still a 2012 R2 cluster. Little time later, the second node has redeployed, so now we're 2 on Windows Server 16, 1 on Windows Server 2012 R2. And in just a second here, the third node will also redeploy and come back. So we've done it 1 at a time. You haven't had a whole cluster outage. And we incrementally are going through these. Perfect. They're all on Server 2016 now. The last thing we have to do is update that functional level. So essentially, at this point, we could still go back in time if we want and back these out and stay with an R2 cluster. But we're happy with the work that VMM did in this case. So we right-click the cluster, update version. We are prompted here because once you do this, you can't go back. You basically committed your changes. So we click yes. The job completes, and you've upgraded your 2012 R2 cluster to 2016 without a lot of the pain you face today. Thanks. I'm going to hand it off to Hector now.
Alrighty, let's switch back to the slides here. Oops. All right, switch back to the slides, and
That is a slide.
I know, I'm trying to find this thing. All right. So in the world of SMB3 and scale-out file servers, you've seen a lot of investments in Windows Server 2012 and R2, and now in 2016 technical preview, on the transition towards converged environments using Ethernet, 10 gig, and the future of Ethernet, and also file-based storage. So the Windows Server team has invested heavily in the SMB3 protocol, scale-out file server, and making sure that scale-out file server is the storage for the private cloud when it comes to deploying virtual machines on Hyper-V. And so what you see as far as from a Microsoft perspective, how we manage scale-out file servers and SMB3. It's actually a pretty large ecosystem. We started with the work that our partners have done. NetApp and EMC are two examples where they've implemented SMB3 natively in their devices. And working with them, we have them building SMIS providers that plug into our management framework, so you can manage them through System Center and also through PowerShell, what's called Storage Management API. Now, our journey with scale-out file server is actually in three places. First, the most popular deployment of scale-out file server actually happens on SAN. So you have an existing SAN, iSCSI or Fiber Channel. You put 2, 4, or 6 scale-out file servers in front of that environment, so you can serve out file shares all the way to your Hyper-V hosts. And so what we've done in 2016 is actually automate the provisioning of SAN to a scale-out file server. So we did this work originally for Hyper-V, where we automate the provisioning of a LUN or a CSV to a Hyper-V host so you can start deploying VMs. So we've taken those same set of primitives, now exposed them for a scale-out file server. You can zone your SAN to your scale-out file server. You can start up the iSCSI initiators and log them onto targets. Once you have that connection made, you start provisioning your LUNs, and from there we'll actually stand up file shares. So the workflow actually says new file share from pool. And then we'll do all the work under the covers to create the LUN, unmask it, initialize partition format, stand up the share, and then you can ACL them to your Hyper-V host. Now, when we move over to Microsoft software-defined storage, you probably know Spaces today, shared spaces, using a shared SaaS infrastructure. The new work coming out in 2016 is actually now direct attached storage, so storage Spaces direct. And so how many of you, I can't see you all, but how many of you know about Spaces Direct? Have seen presentations with Klaus. So great technologies, gives you the great ability to scale out your environment, grow your scale-out file servers, and add modules as you go along, as opposed to having to have one big monolithic shared SaaS infrastructure. So all of these environments are managed using what's called Storage Management API, which then VMM builds on top of. And now with the new work we've done in Windows Server, in 2016, we actually have monitoring integrated as well. So you have VMM doing all the provisioning and discovery, and then you have Operations Manager doing all the monitoring and alerting. So there's a great session on monitoring at 12 o'clock tomorrow with Richard Rundle, who's going to go over all of the innovations in monitoring. And then I've got a session at 9 a.m. tomorrow on storage deep dive. So if you look at the whole ecosystem of managing a scale-out file server, we actually have been growing this portfolio of capabilities over time. And we've leveraged a lot of the capabilities that we've built in SAN and NAS management, and also applied them to managing a scale-out file server. Now we go a few steps further with Windows scale-out file servers, because we allow you to do bare metal deployment. And so the work that you've seen in the past around deploying Hyper-V, you can also apply that to deploying a scale-out file server. So bare metal deployment is a big step in actually being able to stand up this environment, bring it under management. Once you have that under management, we'll discover all the disks, create the pools, and then let you provision file shares. We'll handle all of the ACLing to the hosts. When you build on top of that, obviously the next awesome feature that's coming out is Storage Replica. So now you have in-box synchronous replication built into the platform. And so with work coming after TP2, or Technical Preview 2, we'll actually hook up Storage Replica for synchronous replication between two sites. And then you can hook that up into Azure Site Recovery and do orchestration of failover and failback using ASR and a Hyper-V and Microsoft software-defined storage using scale-out file server and Spaces Direct and Storage Replica. All of that is integrated together. And if you're familiar with the work we've done today, it'll actually be a very smooth transition, because we leverage all of those great capabilities and add experience in enabling these scenarios. So I'm going to do a Spaces Direct demo now. So let me switch over back to this environment. Looks like I got logged down. All right, so I'm going to log into my VMM environment. You're going to be looking at TP2, Technical Preview 2. The UI is very familiar. We haven't done any big revamp of the UI itself. And let's give this 1 second here. Come on. There we go. Those few seconds are like an hour on stage. Alrighty. Switch back to VMM here. Come on. There we go. All right. So here I'm in the Fabric view in Virtual Machine Manager. This is where we have all of our servers, networking, and storage. In the storage area, I go into providers. So this is a provider that is built into Windows that you use to manage all of your scale-out file servers. So this is native in the product. You don't have to go and install anything additional. Once we have this provider added to VMM, then we can start managing the scale-out file server. So if you're familiar with, let's say, VMware and VASA, this is a similar model where we use storage management API to talk to a provider to then talk to the devices. And with VMware, you use VASA to talk to a VASA provider, which then talks to the devices as well. Big difference that we use is standards-based management, and VMware did a proprietary protocol. So once it's under management, you can click on File Servers, and so now you have a file server under management. So this is great if you already have something deployed and it's up and running. You can just add it under management, start deploying your creating shares and deploying your virtual machines. But let's say you want to start fresh. You have two machines that are hardware compatible with Spaces Direct, and you want to start provisioning them. So you start that journey first in creating a hardware profile. So I'm not going to show the full creation of that, but that actually happens in the library. You get a chance to create a hardware profile. This is the blueprint that we use to go and deploy all these physical machines. And this is the same blueprint that John showed for actually doing a mixed mode upgrade. So we use very common experiences for both. So once I have a hardware profile, I'll go into the Fabric, click on Create, and then I can create a file server cluster. So what we've done in this experience is that if you've used this in R2, then we've just enhanced this to be Spaces Direct aware. And the way that you pivot between Spaces Direct and shared spaces is actually in this radio button. So you select the second radio button. This tells us you're going to deploy a Spaces Direct scale-out file server. So we'll do a bunch of magic under the covers to ensure that we don't have MPIO enabled. We'll go and flip the switches so that this is a Spaces Direct environment, and which changes how we enumerate the disks, which buses we can use. So a lot of the stuff happens under the covers, but from your experience, all you've got to do now is give this wizard a name for the cluster. Whoops. And then a name for the scale-out file server. These are two different IP addresses on the network, so they do have to be separate. And you have two options here. You can either specify two existing machines that you've deployed manually, maybe using Pixie Boot or some other deployment mechanism, or you can tell VMM to go off and deploy physical machines from bare metal. And at this point, you tell us the the computer profile to use. I've already got one created. I'll hit Browse. I'll provide the credential for the BMC, for the BMCs. And at this point, I provide all the IP addresses. So once I have the IP addresses added, I can go in, provide the computer name, and then when you hit Finish, we'll go off and do all the deployment, which matches the experience that you saw with Mixed Mode Upgrade. The only difference is we're not upgrading, we're just deploying brand new. So the end result of that is a managed scale-out file server. You can right-click, start managing your pool. So I've got one pool already created, and so I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to expand this so you can see more. So I've got a pool 2. I can classify my pools at this point. This one will have SSDs. And so you'll see in this list, I have the ability to look at the physical location of all of the disks. I can sort by physical location. And you'll see that I've got disks available in multiple slots, in other words, in multiple enclosures, which I can group all of these together into a single pool. So I'll do a check all, and that'll have a mix of SSD and HDD. So I hit Next. I can update the inner leaf size, otherwise just leave it as is. Empty is fine. We'll take the system defaults, hit Finish. Once we watch, so you'll watch this job complete, and then you'll be able to create a file share, and then stand up and ACL them, and then provision your virtual machines. And at this point, since this is all using SMB3, we'll actually do an offloaded copy, not using ODX, but you call something called SMB chunk, copy chunk. And at that point, it is a native copy that can be as fast as the system allows it. And so I'll switch it back now to Eric, and he'll wrap up. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Hector. Thanks, John. So yeah, with that, we're really wrapped. This slide here shows a bunch of external resources. It's a bunch of links, too, so if you pull the slides, you'll have a bunch of links for how to get to information about Update Rollup 6. Again, enlisting yourself in a customer cohort to help us work on future features and what's new. And then these are our related sessions. We have one more tomorrow morning on storage. Otherwise, this is sort of third in the series. And so I'd encourage you to maybe use this deck as well to find these and watch them on video. And with that, I think we'll wrap up. And I see folks are getting out. Don't forget to turn in your surveys, your paper surveys, either up front or at the door. We'll grab those. And I hope you enjoy the rest of Ignite. Thank you.